Wake up, everybody. It's time for the History You Forgot podcast, a podcast where three veteran teachers with 90 years of teaching experience try to remind you of all that stuff that you slept through or ignored when you were in high school. Get ready, because today we're doing the interwar period between World War I and World War II. It's coming at you right now.
Hey guys,
What's happening?
how we doing? This is Jason Jones.
Jeff Breedlove.
And I'm Jason Schmoida. And today we're bringing you those interwar
Interwar
periods. I don't know how we want to kick that off.
You know, rise of authoritarians,
It's a lot. It's a
interwars.
lot.
Kick it off with a drink.
That's the best idea yet. That's
Always
the best
a
idea
good-
yet. What do we got, Jeff?
I think we're back to our kind of whiskey rye
No.
foundation.
Hey.
What we have here is a Wart 8. It originally, the rumor is that it came around turn of the century, 19th to 20th century in Boston, named after sort of a famous, local politician who always relied on the Ward 8, right, for his vote whenever he would run for office. But then again, it became popular during Prohibition. So that's why 1920s, why we kind of chose it. It is rye, lemon juice, a little bit of grenadine and orange juice. So similar to a whiskey sour, but I think that's, I like the color. It's kind of festive.
Yeah.
All right. To the Ward 8, gentlemen.
Yeah, hey, cheers.
To the history you
Cheers.
forgot.
To the history you forgot.
Thanks for watching. All right.
And we want to remind you to follow and like
Please do.
and
Subscribe.
subscribe, all those things as we try to grow this.
Yeah, we created a Facebook page too, right? So you can follow us at the History You Forgot podcast on Facebook. And then from there, I think we'll hopefully have it set up that you can link out to everything, the other social medias.
Yeah.
Well, it's a good call.
Yeah.
I think so that's what happens when we're not like very well versed at the social media side of it.
Right.
So bear with us, guys. I think we'll set up a little context. Basically, if you watched the last couple, we ended World War I, and with the Treaty of Versailles, I believe, is that kind of how we ended
I
it?
think so.
Yeah.
All right. So, kind of quickly, we will go through, we'll give you a little context. We'll come up with the 2 or 3 things you really have to know that you should have remembered. And then we'll kind of wrap it up with some outcomes, effects. But you have to remember now, we're talking those interwar year periods, right? Most historians now really treat this as one 30-year block
Big
of
old
time,
war.
right? It's not World War I and World War II. It's sort of the world wars.
Yeah.
The end of World War I and the way the treaty works pretty much guarantees a second, right? Everybody already knows it, right? That the treaty fails. So you've got a bad treaty. You have a Germany that is angry and resentful and bitter, and you'll touch more on that.
Yeah.
You've got France and Great Britain who are looking for their pound of flesh, right? They have been treated, they believe, horribly. Russia has now flipped, right? It is no longer an absolute monarchy. The provisional government has taken over, right? So the absolute monarchy has fallen. Germany, Ottoman Empire, Austria-Hungary, Russian, all of those empires are no longer. So you've got a power vacuum, right, in the East, a lot of different ethnicities, nationalities, language, new countries that are going to come out of it. You've got a lot of like nationalism, autonomy, self-determination, people looking to become independent that used to be part of these great empires.
Maine is still in full effect. Militarism,
Absolutely.
alliances,
Absolutely.
In many ways, the same.
socialism, and nationalism.
Yeah, just kind of in a post-war sense.
still.
But we'll kind of, I think, lay the groundwork for the authoritarians or these rises that you remember that when all of these monarchies fell, they had ruled these countries for 300-400 years. I mean, they had been long-standing conservative governments ruled by a single family or person. So just because those governments have been ended, right, you can't just all of a sudden flip a switch and expect democracy to take over, right? So you've got a history of conservative authoritarian just under a monarchy. You have no middle class. So there isn't really any group that's going to support a parliament or a democracy. They're very agrarian, still land-based.
Yep.
And they're going to be carved out of, these sort of ethnic regions, and the history of those ethnicities is conflict and battle. So, just because the war is over, it's just starting a new phase. But I think Germany really is kind of the one that triggers the whole thing in terms of the way it's treated, or at least feels it's treated, right?
Yeah. So Germany feels very much stabbed in the back. A lot of Germans don't feel like they lost the war, right? They just the Weimar Republic is going to be the new democratic government. You've got a democratic government for a brief time in Russia, even. I mean, so and the hard part is you've got to remember that these people are used to being told what to do,
Right.
and now all of a sudden they have some freedom, and they don't know what to do with it. Right. And so it's hard to get that capitalistic vibe in the economy and all those things running when you're used to being told when and where you can spend your money and how you do things. Right. So,
You know, in a modern day example, I wonder if people watching might be more familiar with what sort of happened in Russia at the end of the Cold War.
right.
Where Yeltsin and that sort of quote unquote democratic government gave way to an oligarchy because the people that did. I don't know if is that comparable at all to that time period?
It's comparable in the sense that, like Mr. Jones was just saying, right? The history of those countries is authoritarian, autocratic leaders.
Yeah.
So, as we all know, democracy it's already fragile, right? I mean, democracy is always fragile. It takes a little while. But you need, and I think you have to remember, it needs a supported middle class, right? They're the ones who, this sort of educated middle class, will take over from these democracies. They'll run for office. They'll take seats in parliaments. If you don't have that, they tend to fall apart.
Well, and the Weimar Republic was successful from like 1919 till about the mid 20s. And then when the economic collapse in the world happened, then all of a sudden that gives the authoritarians an opportunity again to seize power.
Always economic.
Yeah. And so if you think about the treaty and how Germany was treated with the treaty, their military their army could only be 100,000 men. They couldn't have an air force, right? So they went from a country that was thriving militarily to a country that is feeling very they're unprepared for anything. Anything that would come their way militarily, they don't feel like they can protect themselves. They are going to be forced to sign a war guilt clause that is going to say we're at fault for this war. And you're going to have to pay war reparations. That's in the millions and millions of dollars.
Ridiculous amount.
And after you lose a war, your economy is generally not very good. So to keep up with those war reparations is going to be very, very difficult. And actually, they can't do it.
Right away.
Yeah. And so, there's the demilitarized zone in the Rhineland. So you've got this buffer between France and Germany. You've got Germany who's worried, Russia who's worried about Germany still because they've been attacked by Germany and multiple times, right, at this point, and will be again. And how do we protect ourselves? And so they're forced to pay these war reparations. You have the demilitarized zone in an area that is an industrial region for Germany. And so if you think about this, so what ends up happening is Germany defaults on the loan payments.
Yeah, right away.
Right. And so France immediately says, well, you've got to pay somehow. Right. And they are going to go into the Rhineland, which is the demilitarized zone, but very industrial part of Germany, and say these factories, these people, the money that they bring in are going to go to France in terms of loan payments. And the people say, no, we're not doing that. And so now the Weimar Republic, and this is going to be the start of their downfall, is what do? We have to support these people. They're Germans.
Yeah, I think you have to remember, too, that typically these conservative governments for hundreds of years have always dealt with economic crisis with tariffs, monopolies, right? Much more sort of heavy-handed government, right? They're not used to having free markets and more open. And when the war is over, they don't know even what kind of laws to pass.
Right.
They default to what they know, and it doesn't work.
Well, they print more money, right? They print more money.
Which, as the economics teacher, is the wrong answer on every test, every time.
Inflation.
Right. And it literally gets to a point where it's 4 million marks
or billion. It's crazy.
A dollar.
Right. Wow. You've all seen those pictures, right? Where, people are carrying, wheelbarrows full of cash to buy a newspaper.
Right. Or the kid, they've tied the marks into blocks and the kids are playing with the marks.
Because it's cheaper to
or
use the paper
starting
currency,
fires or-
right?
Yeah.
I love the one where they're like wallpapering their wall.
So that's hyperinflation.
Yeah,
Right. That's hyperinflation where it has gotten so bad. The bread lines are long and people don't know what they're going to do.
Yeah, aren't people getting paid in cash like twice a day, right? Because by the time they go home with a paycheck in the morning, their money has been devalued. I don't know, don't quote me, but I saw somewhere like prices are doubling like every 48 hours. I mean, and the only answer, because they don't know what to do, is just to print, which makes the problem worse.
Right. And so this type of economic issue is what's going to lead to the Mussolinis and the Hitlers and the Stalins
started it, right?
To gain power because they're going to say whatever they think the people want to hear.
Yeah. Well, I think it just adds to that overall sense that we kind of hit on that, the war is over and the economic chaos, right? I mean, this is a perfect example of, Germans who have already been starved, Germans who are already, infrastructure has been destroyed. There's no jobs.
Yeah, right.
And now their government doesn't know how to react.
Right.
And it makes it worse.
Well, and there is a period where there is some success with democracy.
They do recover a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah. And in the roaring 20s is happening in the United States.
Berlin is place for all that.
Yeah,
absolutely.
And they are, the arts and music and some of these things are really coming on in Germany.
Well, as our American guy, there's kind of a reason for that, right? Isn't it all propped up with like American dollars?
There is the United States is in an interesting situation after the war. There's a pretty deep recession for a couple years, but by 1923, even 1922, 23, the United States economy is pretty well booming. An interesting way to transition from what you were talking about to the United States is to look at sort of that revolving war debt, because we got caught right in the middle of that, right? We were a third of that triangle, whereas we signed a separate treaty with Germany. We didn't join the League of Nations. We didn't sign the Treaty of Versailles. We signed a separate treaty with Germany and then promised to loan Germany money to try to help them out.
Right, to pay the reparations.
So in the process, money from America going to Germany for loans, Germany using that money to pay off the Allies who are now flaming mad and want them to pay off that debt. And they're the same allies that had borrowed from us, and we were demanding payment from them.
So it's all
no one's winning.
Right.
Mr. Schmoida, so you've got Britain and France who are hell-bent on making Germany pay.
Yeah.
But you've got President Wilson in the United States saying, here's 14 ways we never allow this to happen again. And
it's a whole separate issue, right?
And different viewpoints on how this should go through.
The only problem with that is you're correct about Wilson, but Wilson loses the whole bid. And in 1920, literally, he's on his deathbed, right? And he's trying to make that 1920 election in the United States a solemn referendum on the treaty. And a Republican, Warren G. Harding, is elected, which basically takes all of that 14 points Treaty of Versailles stuff, sets it aside, and the country really moves on. We really move on from it.
Do we go back to like an isolationist standpoint?
100%.
That's what I thought.
100%. We really moved against two things, because before the World War I, we had been involved much more internationally in imperialistic kinds of modes. And we also were more involved governmentally. This was again, we haven't covered it yet on the podcast, but this is a progressive period before World War I. And we react pretty seriously 180 degrees to both. And we end up in a very isolationist period, a very conservative, classically conservative, like think libertarian in today's world, because
old capital C conservative.
Yeah, for sure.
And the League of Nations was a Wilson brain. He was the brainchild of that.
It was his,
and
it was
now
his baby.
it's the United Nations, for those of you who don't.
Well, and that won't be yet, right?
Right, but now it is.
Yeah, for sure.
But and we're of course a part of that.
Yeah,
but
and I guess it would actually
Congress wouldn't let us join the country, the United States join.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And I guess actually I just made a mistake. It'd be lower C conservatism, not like as a party, as an old style, like pull yourself up by your bootstraps, small government.
So the Republicans of the 1920s were classic hands-off, laissez-faire, old school. We don't want the government involved in much of anything. That included social issues. That included economic issues. It included foreign policy. I mean, literally, if you think about what libertarian means in today's world,
you like make it safe for business, you police, and you have military. That's about it. Right.
Well, I mean, Harding and Coolidge both used to talk about, if I'm doing too much work, if I'm working overtime, I'm doing too much as the president. I shouldn't be, right? You know, Coolidge used to put his feet up and take a nap in the middle of the day. And not because he's lazy. He was certainly not a lazy human being. But the idea was that this government should not be that active. And that was you know, a double-edged sword, because on one hand, it's one of the reasons why our economy boomed the way it did.
I was just going to say, that's interesting. Yeah.
Booms bust, right?
Which is what happens. Booms bust. But I think the key here, though, is like you did before, is that all this European bounce that finally does take hold a little bit in the mid-20s is all on the backs of American propped up sort of, you know, international help, but that's just a veneer. I mean, there isn't any robust economic system to back it up.
No.
Right.
And then hyperinflation just is
and we're going to go away and not be much of an aid to the world here very shortly.
Right. Well, and the idea of the Dawes plan was to not let Germany just totally collapse.
Correct.
Right. I mean,
because they're so a powerful economy. If you let them, I mean,
well, and before the war, they were arguably 1, 2, or 3 economically in the world.
Yeah.
Right. So if we let them just collapse, you know, you're losing a huge chunk of the world economy.
Too big to fail.
Right. The Chrysler of the early. But I think it's also the idea that out of economic and political chaos, right, these fringe left-wing communist sort of elements prosper. So a lot of that economic assistance on the part of the U.S. and others is that if we keep Germany afloat, it keeps them safe for democracy, right? I mean, making the world safe for democracy, that it will keep those radical elements down, right? They won't have a place to grow.
Yeah.
Which is, I think, probably a lot of it. Plus, we get our money back. I mean, I don't know if this is one of those wars you would, but the U.S. typically, you know, does pretty well economically as a result of war. You know, military industrial complex goes up.
In those 20th century wars, that's true. For sure.
Yeah, the U.S. is fortunate that they're not fought on their soil.
Totally.
You know,
absolutely.
100%. Yeah, it's especially true of World War I, World War II. But in the interwar period, you know, it's weird. It's a tale of two moments, because we will experience the boom and the growth, and we have some pride in being a national power. We're going to reject it. We're going to be isolationist, but at the same time, then everything crumbles when everybody else crumbles. And in many ways, we exacerbate that global.
Pretty much,
yeah, no doubt about it, right? You'll speak to that economics at some point. We probably
think we need to do
thing on that.
I think the economics element of it is what's really, you know, everyone goes, oh, the Great Depression. Well, there is a whole lot more going on than just the Great Depression. And, you know, and you have to remember too, I think, before we kind of set off on this path, is that, you know, by the time World War I ends and the treaty is settled, we're talking, you know, 1919. Yeah. This is a very brief 20-year period, right? Some would argue that, you know, World War II is already kind of on its way by 37, right, with the Japanese and Manchuria and things. But this is one generation, right? So I remember reading, and this is a big deal, that the generation that fought World War I will be those who were in charge during World War II. So they're operating out of the same mindset, economically, politically, socially, right, of the Versailles Treaty, of that period, right? And now they're the ones calling the shots. And it's a different, you know, they've lived through now this very brief but really chaotic period.
It's interesting.
Which I think we're going to try to hit the big 3 or 4.
Kind of the rise of it. And that, so what we'll do now is take that political angle.
Yeah, that
and kind of leave the economic angle for another episode, maybe.
Sure.
But if we wanted to get started with this, we thought maybe we'd start with the Soviet Union and the rise of the Soviet Union. Now I always want to remind people, they're on our team in World War II. Right, they end up being, and World War II as well.
Right, both, yeah.
But when we're also going to have to look at the rise of that Axis power, you know, the Germany and Italy and Japan, of course. But starting with the Soviet Union, which is super interesting in my opinion, because again, you guys already said it started out as a democratic election, right? When the Tsar was toppled, there was a lot of expectation that this was moving in a very democratic way, and it took until that second so-called Bolshevik revolution. How long? What was the time frame? It wasn't very long.
March was the first October, like 6 months.
Months.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
Just a few. I was thinking it was less than a year.
Yeah.
And then we have the Bolshevik Revolution, led by, of course, Lenin. And Lenin was able to make this happen. And I always try to like broaden out and think about when a power like that wants to take control, what can they promise people who are hungry, poor? You promise them food, you promise them services, and what did it call it? Land, bread, and peace,
So
right?
get out of the war.
Well, yeah, that's huge. I think that's really big, that Lenin promised to get them out of the war. And so it's important to remember that Russia left the war, and it was a two-front war, and now all of a sudden it's not. And that's why the United States, it became very important that the United States.
It opened the door.
But I also love the fact that, that Lenin has been exiled already from Russia, right? For being a troublemaker.
Yeah.
And he is being funded by the Germans. I mean, he is put on a train heading back to Russia by the Germans with money and promise, right? That he will end the war, and Germany then will, give them a break, right, in the revolution, take their side. So, there's a lot of behind the scenes stuff going on here.
I don't know that I knew that. I don't know that I was very familiar with.
Oh yeah, look it up. Google it. There's all these great photos that you probably seen him Lenin like disguised, right, so he can be shoved back on a train, and when he gets there, no one's supposed to know he's back in the country. But
well, and then the surprise of it was how soon Lenin passed, because that left a real vacuum, right? And you have Lenin's buddy Trotsky, Leon Trotsky, and then Joseph Stalin, who disliked, hated each other.
I think Lenin would have said that. Even Lenin, I don't think, trusted Stalin.
Okay,
right?
Fair.
I mean, Trotsky's the brains.
Yeah.
And Stalin's the goon squad.
Yeah.
And the goon squad always wins, doesn't it?
Yeah. Goon squad always wins.
Stalin is ruthless.
Yeah.
What's his nickname?
As we find out.
Crap, what's his nickname? Captain Index Card. Because this is crazy. He has compiled as general secretary. He's like secretary of the party. He earns it by like robbing banks, right? He's like funding the revolution. He amasses a giant Rolodex, basically, of all of the people that he has sort of helped in the party, right? Who rely on him now for their jobs, for their positions, for their place in a new communist Russia. So when push comes to shove, he's able to kind of hit this Rolodex and start calling in favors. And that's what kind of tips the scales. But you have to remember that I think, I don't know, maybe I always used to teach that the irony of Lenin is that when he comes to power in the Soviet Union, he tries a little capitalism.
Yeah. Right.
I think what's his new economic plan, right? Jones E. DNP. It works. A little bit of free market, a little bit of private ownership. But like we just said, too little, too late. Yeah. Everybody wants it to be better.
Yeah.
Nobody can, it's painful. It's like a Band-Aid.
Right.
So it's not going to work, which is why they're going to immediately go when Lenin dies to Stalin.
Yeah. In collectivization and
that's even coming later.
So those of us that grew up in the 70s and 80s probably remember studying all the different takes on communism, right? There's traditionally Marxism, Leninism had his own thing, Stalinism has its own thing, and Stalin brings a heavy fist. And he brings the plan for industrialization and urbanization, the 5-year plan. Collectivism is moved sort of from maybe the fields at that point, if I'm not mistaken. We have a word in our notes. I'm just cracking up as I'm thinking about terror. It was a huge component of what
you can overlook the purge.
A huge component of what Stalin did. Probably, ultimately by the end of Stalin's reign, what was it, like 11 million Russians that he was responsible for killing?
I think if you count the war, it's like double that. I mean, it's just huge.
Yeah. Insane. Yeah.
But I think you probably also do this with Stalin's power is going to come not only his ruthlessness, but in his like willingness to do anything to keep power. I mean, the collectivization of farms is a horrible failure.
Yeah.
And talk about the Ukraine right today. I mean, there is all sorts of remnants of what's going on. The kulaks are the class that owns the land. They are told to give up their land to the state. They refuse. They protest. So Stalin is going to orchestrate a famine where basically was a Holodomor. I apologize for the pronunciation, where he will have all the food that's grown shipped elsewhere. So he starves the kulaks into submission, right? And something like 3 million kulaks die in Stalin's willingness to make a point, right? Don't mess with him.
Well, and since he wants their land and collectivization, just to make sure we explain that a little bit, you're telling this town or this group of people that you are going to farm this many acres, right? And then it all is for, in true communism, for the good of the state, right? So you aren't selling it to make money. You're going to give it to the state. The state's going to make money. They're going to take care of you, right? And ultimately, in true communism, eventually the government's supposed to kind of go away.
Absolutely.
And the people run
as a theory.
Yeah, as a theory.
Yes.
But there was no plan. There was no plan of that here for
no, not for
which I think is going to have to be a whole separate episode, right? And when you read, Marx. Yeah, I mean, you're right, Jones. That
it's a utopian type of
it becomes
ending.
Which is why I think the point is, like you just said, right? It's Stalinism, it's Maoism,
it's one of the primary reasons. Plenty of reasons to look and be very critical of the concept of communism. In fact, the whole agricultural system there and in China both failed them both miserably, right? So there's reason to. But I think one of the reasons we, as Americans, fear communism to the level we do is him.
Is what?
It's Stalin. Joseph Stalin. I mean, just the way he...
For sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Pound your fists and threaten and threaten and threaten. It has to be part of it.
Well, like you were just saying, I mean, the terror.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, how many people are disappeared? I mean,
you didn't challenge. You did disappear.
No, I mean,
right? And then, but that leads into other leaders in the continent.
Yeah, for sure.
Like a Mussolini.
Yeah, I mean, 100% same time. I mean,
well, and we can pivot to these guys under the kind of, we've used the word nationalism so much in our podcast so far. It's a good pivot to that because, of course, clearly what Stalin was doing was nationalistic, but what really drove, I think, both Italy, Germany, and Japan were a hyper nationalistic kind of approach, right?
Uber.
Yeah.
Uber. Yeah. I mean, I think that the root of any of those sort of, fascism, nationalism, Nazism is that hyper sense. I think that the key is all of it is going to lie. It will get its basis in fear and chaos, right? I mean, you have to remember that millions of men return home from the war. So they are already trained. They are militarized, right? They're ready. They know how to shoot a gun. They're ready to beat somebody's butt. They can't find jobs, right? Their governments don't know how to put food on the table, to orchestrate a government that works. Democracy, too many voices. Right? No, too many craziness out there. Like nothing is getting done. Social reforms, right? Women have a new place in society. Fringe groups, communist socialism. So it is, for a young, think about it. I always think about a young 21-year-old kid coming back from war to their city, their town may be pulverized.
Right.
There's nothing, right? And the system that is in play, these democratic provisional governments fail.
Yeah.
So out of the wilderness, right, you get a voice. Who usually with a very simple message, right? It's a one tone, jobs.
Yeah.
It really revolves around, I will get you jobs. I will fix the economy. I will do whatever it takes. And so Mussolini, right, in Italy is going to use that. The great story, right? He starts young. He is a newspaper editor. He switches parties. He's a socialist to begin with, realizes that.
I think he might have even been a teacher.
There's always these great stories. I know, right? Like, you can't make it as a teacher. Take over your country. Those who can't do, right? Take over, nation states. But yeah, and then he sort of puts together this highly militarized fringe movement where it's all about violence and fear. So, these young men who are already disenfranchised coming back with nothing, it's, you sit around at a table in a bar and you're like talking about how horrible it is. And the next thing you know, you're on the street beating up some people and, creating all sorts of chaos to work out your anger. But then somebody's going to harness that and go, hey, wait, there's power in that violence. And that's basically what Mussolini's going to do.
Well, yes. And he was really good at saying, hey, you guys go do this.
Sure.
Right. And then I'm going to stand back. So he would encourage people to go do things. Yeah. Stay clean. And they would. Yeah. And then he wouldn't get arrested. They would. And then he could continue the movement.
And he could also then, right, when those people have been arrested, then he could claim that, oh, well, look, I cleaned up the streets, right? I saved you by taking away the violence, but he's the one who had created the violence in the first place, right? So he's these little black shirt squads, Ristis, that are going around terrorizing everybody. But again, I think the thing about both Germany and Italy is you have to remember that these governments are elected democratically.
Yeah.
Right. I think that the thing that you remember is that in democracy, when you have these fringe voices, these kind of really outlying extremists, the way democracy works is if you give them power, they kind of get quieted, right? If all of a sudden they're out there in the midst and nobody's challenging, they kind of live out here in the ether. But if they all of a sudden have a seat at the table and their views are nationalized, people in theory should go, oh, this is crazy. And they shouldn't last, right? They should get voted out once people realize.
And Mr. Breedlove, correct me here, but Victor Emmanuel II
the king
put Mussolini in this position. He was placed.
Right.
Now that was much earlier. That was like the early 20s, right?
Yeah, like
Mussolini.
22, 23. Okay. Mussolini organizes these various squad into what he's going to call the March on Rome, right? Where I know tens of thousands of them are going to display a force, sort of march down Rome, the streets of Rome. And at that point, you're right, the king and the chancellor all go, there's something afoot. And this is going to sound really odd, I know, but the belief is if you bring Mussolini to the table, right, you will give his voice, you amplify the nationalism, you amplify the fringe element, and people will reject it. Right. So that's how it works. So you give him a seat, people go, oh, this isn't for us. And then he's out. Right. That's what they're hoping, to keep him in power. They control him.
Control him. Yeah, that's a great. Yeah,
they think they can control him by bringing him in. And but the first thing he's going to do is he's going to disband all political parties. He's going to censor newspapers.
He stood on the balcony and spouted things that they wanted to hear, like you said earlier. We'll bring jobs. We're going to rebuild the military. We're going to Italy will be like Rome again.
And when you frame all of that under, we're going to revive the Roman Empire.
Totally.
We're going to bring back our rightful place in the country, which you hear here, you hear in Germany, you hear in Japan, you hear in all these places. We're going to bring back our rightful place. It's really hard then sometimes for people to look at that and say, that's crazy. We shouldn't do it. Because, hey, wait a minute, we might get what we deserve.
And I think you remember, Italy feels like they got a little bit of the short end of the stick at the end of World War One. So this is a way to put themselves back on the spot, right? I mean, they feel like they're more important than the world recognizes them to be.
They lost land from the treaty, and they had already given up and joined the other side.
Like they
still lost land.
I think that's important because Italy was originally in the alliance with Germany and Austria-Hungary, and they flipped sides, promised land, didn't get it.
Yeah.
Right. And so they're frustrated.
Oh, yeah.
So you tap into all that, right? I think it's easy to look at it from, 80 years on and go, how is that? But, you're tapping into a very, very vocal group of young people who are looking for change. But I think what you touch on there is, he also goes back to those real sort of conservative ideals, right? Women get out of the workplace. You should not be working in jobs. You should be home having children. Well, that opens up jobs for men, right? So now they're back employed. It kind of evens the social playing field, men, their roles.
Some of the things I thought was the most fascinating about Mussolini was he encouraged men and women to bring their wedding rings to the government so that he could melt them down. And now there's more gold in the coffers. He also, talking about women going back home, I think it was if you had 14 children,
something like
Mussolini presented you with a medal for reviving, the military.
Wow.
And I mean, it was ridiculous.
He's one of the guys that's going to perfect the propaganda piece. He's got this message down.
And he's the first fascist. I think that's really important.
I think, fascism is his turn, right? It's going to be different, but it is a corporate economy too. You have to remember, people always goes, the rich people benefit, so they're all in, right? Because he bans labor unions. He freezes minimum wage or wages, so people can't go on strike. And so those people who own factories are loving it.
He's also the first to use the camera
Totally.
to
sure.
promote
Yes.
himself and
Yeah.
what
It's a
he's
great
trying to tell.
It's a great one.
You know, and literally, and we
This is where I
joked,
take my shirt off.
we took, yeah, we. Mr. Schmoyer was
we,
gonna
we
take
drew
his shirt
straws.
off because Mussolini would take his shirt off and go out and work with the farmers, and they'd video it, and he'd ride around on horses. And so today, when you see those pictures of Putin,
Right.
and he's got
I
his
saw
shirt
the
off, he's
shark.
riding around
That's
on a
it.
horse.
Right.
There's that connection there,
Absolutely.
but because Mussolini's the first fascist, and you've got this guy in Germany
Right.
that's trying to revive Germany with the same message. I'll bring jobs. We'll ignore the treaty. We'll rebuild the military.
Yeah.
And he literally,
He being
Hitler, I'm sorry.
right. No, I was going to say
is going to go
name
to
him, right?
Italy and learn
Right.
fascism from Mussolini.
Well, and maybe this is a good way to make that transition, but didn't Mussolini gained a lot of cred throughout the Depression because Italy wasn't hit nearly as hard by the Depression as a result of his policies,
It's a
right?
economy, right? So you're using government dollars to rebuild Italy, but you're using private corporations to do the work. So you're contracting with these giant corporations to build roads, to build aqueducts, to bring in water and sewers and mass transit systems. So you're putting people to work. Right. Everybody's got a job. The economy starts to rebound. Women are out of the workplace. It's all financed on government dollars, which are repaid back by corporate taxes. And it does work for a period of time.
So Mussolini is placed in the government to try to control him. The Nazis in Germany are winning seats in the Reichstag, which is the Congress. And Hitler will eventually win an election, basically,
become chancellor,
and become chancellor. And he's going to do a lot of different things that he learns from Mussolini, but he takes it even to the next level and how he's going to use fascism and those kinds of things. So if you think about Hitler, he is going to do or have a meeting. It's going to be called the Beer Hall Putsch. Right. I always say that wrong. That may be wrong.
I don't think there's a K on it, but yeah, no, you're right.
I like it. It sounds German that way.
But
well, this is before he's even known.
Yeah, before he's even known, and he's getting ready to try to overthrow the government. Right. In this beer hall, they're in this beer hall, which always makes sense. Right. Drink some beer and then go try to overthrow the government.
No warning in his hands.
and it fails, and he's arrested and he's put in prison. And most of you, if you've followed World War II at all, know that he wrote a book there, and it's called Mein Kampf. And he basically outlines all the horrible things he wants to do and all the things that he thinks needs to happen for Germany to become Germany.
Yeah.
And so
there's what they call that pan-Germanism.
Yeah.
Right. Like he wants to really rebuild. Right.
Was that in part because Italy had a fairly homogenous population. Germany didn't. And I think that's what Hitler was trying to take advantage of, right? Like cleansing and all those dirty words that come from this.
So after the Treaty of World War I and Europe was chopped up into all these new countries. Yeah. Hitler's idea was with pan-Germanism is we've got to bring all the Germans back together. So
the German speaking,
the culture,
German, whatever.
So, and there's Germans in Czechoslovakia, and there's Germans in Poland, and there's Germans in Austria, and we need all those people to be together because we're Germans.
Yeah, right.
And that was a huge thing for him, in trying to and if you think about the world at the time, nobody wanted to go to war again. Right. You had Chamberlain in Britain, who is, famous for saying, we have peace in our time. Hitler is, a friend of ours.
Man, we can do business.
Man, we can do business with. Thank you. And so, they had this meeting and Hitler convinced them that I've taken what I want. I've brought Germans together.
Munich Pact.
We'll stop.
Well, I think that the
appeasement, right? Appeasement for the
and the key is that, Hitler wins these elections piece by piece, and then he is brought in, made chancellor, and then he rigs the next election, with the Reichstag fire, He burns the Capitol building down, blames it on the communists, and gets a majority. But by taking these pieces of land, first the Rhineland.
Rhineland.
So he's telling the Germans basically, or
between Germany and France.
right, and he's telling the Germans, I'm going to, stick it to the treaty. I'm going to rearm. I'm going to rebuild.
Yeah.
So he takes the Rhineland, and France and the world does nothing.
Yeah.
Right. So he's a little emboldened. And then, he marches into
Austria, right?
Well, first Austria
first,
right,
yeah.
with the Anschluss, right? And he reunifies the Germans there, and he holds an election, right? And he's, all the Austrians. This is Sound of Music.
He's welcomed by the king.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Well, the Sound of Music is all about that, right? If you want to be a Nazi or not. But then eventually the Sudetenland,
which is in Czechoslovakia.
and he promises that he's finished.
He's done.
Which is what leads to appeasement. And then, what was it, 6 weeks later, he marches right through Poland on September 1st. Right. Or Czechoslovakia.
A little bit of time. He bought himself some time with the Munich Pact to get a little bit more militarized.
Well, he's literally just pushing the envelope every single time to see what the world is going to do, and the world does nothing.
Well, then he freaks the world out because he's said communism, no.
Right.
And then he has the Russia-German pact. Right. And they go in and take Poland, right? And so he's said communism is for the birds.
Yeah, they're on opposite.
All of a sudden, it's not.
Yeah, they're on opposite ends of the spectrum,
Yeah.
right? You've got Nazism, which was a far right authoritarian. You've got communism in its perfect form, right? Is far left,
but it's sort of me. That I always think of that as like me promising Jeff that I won't hurt him. I'm getting ready to punch you.
Right.
That's really what it was. So
I've also made a deal that you're going to hit him from the front.
Yeah.
And once he goes down, I'm going to kick him in the back.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, that's what it is. It's saying.
Yeah.
Well, but other things start happening.
Yeah.
The Nuremberg laws, right? Where you have Hitler basically telling the world that we're going to mistreat the Jews, right? And those types of things where that's just two laws, but it basically allows free reign on Nazis to mistreat the Jews, destroy synagogues, destroy their businesses, treat them as second-class citizens.
But it's legally making them second-class citizens.
Right.
And then it's similar in the United States to like the black codes during Reconstruction.
100%. Right. And it expands it to, eventually it's, lots of what you call, Germanic people are going to be included in that, right? And homosexuals, disabled, Catholics, Roma. I mean, it's going to be a pretty big umbrella eventually.
I always think of it like a totem pole, right? Where he whatever he calls Aryan race on, and then there's a totem pole, and you're ranked and
But I think what's interesting is we always focus on the Italy and the Germany part. I mean, clearly World War II is going to be a whole separate. I mean, I think we've set it up, but everybody's rearmed. I mean, Germany has come back on the premise of we're going to rearm
new and better weapons.
Right. And Italy has, re-energized their men to create another Roman Empire. So they're rearmed. The Soviet Union is clearly rearmed. I mean, so within a matter of time, we're back on the precipice. Even the US has gone down this path. I mean, people forget that, I think. I mean, and you want to...
Well, we were, yeah. It was as early as 1935. We were both at the same time simultaneously promising to be neutral if a war breaks out, and yet building the military and preparing for a draft. I think the bigger threat is the threat out east, which is something else that's growing very quickly, is the rise of Imperial Japan. Right?
For sure.
I think we forget sometimes that does coincide, even though they're not completely related to each other as not a non-European power. What was happening in Japan, we were concerned about Japan from the time World War I ended. There's some international agreements in the 1920s where we were trying to limit Japanese military in the Pacific to, there's a famous Washington Naval Conference. That's super nerdy. Won't get into it. But like that was the idea, limiting Japan and making sure that Britain and the United States always had more presence in the Pacific.
Japan got Germany's colonies after World War I in the Pacific. So
that was to limit them there and promise that China could keep some things as well. And
I think if you think about Britain and Japan, island countries, they don't have the resources they need.
For sure.
Britain is, the British Empire. And now Japan is wanting kind of their piece of the pie. They need resources.
Well, and the timing's terrible if you think about it, because if you're trying to catch up technologically and you're trying to catch up industrially and you don't have resources, right? The number one export from Japan is fish. So the one thing they need is resource, iron and steel. Well, who at that time was producing the most iron and steel in the world? The United States was producing the most iron and steel.
The other thing I think is important too to maybe throw in here is the U.S. is trying to be isolationist, but Asia has historically tried to keep the West out of their business, right? And so,
but we're working deals to do it, right? So we're, on one hand, we're trading iron and steel with a country that's trying to industrialize, but on the other hand, we're trying to keep them down, hold them down, because we don't want to get involved. Well, it's the irony of America trying to be isolationist in the 20s, is that you can't. It's too late. That ship sailed, so to speak, right? And so here what you have is Japan making decisions about, well, trading for these resources getting harder. And countries don't want to be involved with other countries as much as they used to be, and they don't want us to be impaired. We're just going to have to take it. And they look to China, and they're like, well, if we want these resources, they're right freaking there.
There's a lot of land there.
Let's just go.
Living space, right? Living space too.
That's another one. Lebensraum.
Yeah, Germany was the same way.
2/3 of Japan is mountains.
Yeah.
Right. So you think about
very similar,
a very tight population, limited resources. They're trying to industrialize. Something's got to give. The nationalists are trying to find a way to do it in a little bit more diplomatic way, but the imperialist sort of side of that is going to push that. And it's funny because you could go all the way back to the 20s and see the United States trading steel and oil to Japan, and you could predict Pearl Harbor from there. Even if you think about it, it's a direct line to Pearl Harbor.
Another interesting thing about Japan and China was China had allowed Japan to come in and put in some railroads. And so you've got a Japan going in and actually blowing up some of their own railroads to say, look what China did, and now we're going to invade.
A little wag the dog. Yeah. I'm not like, but a little carrot in front of me. Create the situation that you're going to fix. I think the thing we're overlooking here too, it kind of might be a good way to end. I don't know. The episode is that what's going to bring this kind of all crumbling together. I mean, it's the Great Depression.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, when the U.S., for all sorts of reasons, tanks, our economy, it will be a ripple effect.
Yes.
So all of the countries around the world that had now depended on the U.S. economy, dollar buying, selling, can't survive without them. So I think it keeps going into your U.S. is trying to play this fine line.
Yeah.
How do you buy isolationists if you are literally the backbone of the world's economy in some ways?
Yeah.
So that when our economy craters, as bad as it is here, and we all know the stories, it's magnified exponentially around the world.
Right. So the United States will play that role of the we want to be isolationists. We don't want to get involved in another global conflict. We don't want to be, but we're dabbling with all kinds of fire. We're playing a kind of a really risky economic game. We've got an American Communist Party that's growing more popular as the Depression gets worse. We've got a Nazi party. There's an American Nazi party that's growing pretty towards that right-wing fascist kind of way that people
extremists,
but even notable names like we talked, Charles Lindbergh, famous for flying across the Atlantic, was kind of the leading voice of the back then America First campaign, and he was touting Hitler's success in Germany. So we're really towing a line that's, again, the attempt to be isolationist and stay out of trouble, and we're flirting with it at every turn. And I think that's probably why we need to go down the economic road of all this before we get to World War II, maybe.
Yeah, maybe. And I think that you actually just touched on something. I want to make sure that when we talk about, touching on like Germany, Italy, even the Soviet Union, I mean, are all sort of caught up, right? By the time World War II comes around economically, right? They're kind of on par. Yep. But for all the, economically, Hitler does bring Germany back from the cusp. Mussolini does bring Italy back, and not in any way trying to rationalize or justify, but the people that supported this.
That's why they're still there.
That's where that's it, right? They're able to look to it and go, but look at this, climbing GDP based on these really simple promises. The problem is they're very simple promises, and they're not going to, the whole house of cards will collapse. Yeah. But, that's what people go back to is the economic stability that these people bring.
Even today, your pocketbook is where you feel it, right?
Right,
And
right. If you're not unemployed,
yeah, I mean,
you can buy groceries and your kids aren't hungry.
so with all this being said, there are a lot of really interesting people you could have a drink with.
Oh, man, yeah.
And
I think it's on Sheboygan. Yeah,
This was tough. I always seem to get it done before it's time to have a drink with somebody. I don't know why I do that, but
because I think this drink is a little lighter.
it is.
I mean, it's not like
yeah. It went quick. I struggled with this one, and I thought about it a lot. But I'm gonna kind of cheat again and go down that road of maybe an unnamed person and just say like randomly pick prominent German citizen in the 1930s and just sit down and talk about that development in Germany. Because how often did we learn growing up? Well, the German people didn't really know, and then we learned, well, they did.
Right.
They did kind of know. To what extent could they stop it? To what extent could they speak out? Probably not much. But I would love to just sit and have that conversation with someone that was there first hand. Like, did people, what did you know? Did you try to, were people really trying to do things? Because we know there's cases of people trying to do things, but they usually got squashed, right?
But they ended up, being disappeared.
I think at first they didn't know, and then all of a sudden they probably did know, but then it's too late.
Maybe.
How do you speak out against the Nazis and Hitler without being eliminated yourself?
It's that poem, right? That first they came for fill in the blank.
Yeah.
And as long as you're not necessarily the one, you think it'll stop there.
Right.
Well, then there's some really cool. There's like who's the pastor? Dietrich Bonhoeffer, right? Dietrich Bonhoeffer was a Protestant of some kind, minister in Germany. He literally tried to carry Lutheran ministry. Tried to carry out an assassination attempt and believed that he could rationalize it.
Right.
It's just fascinating to me. Anyway, I think it would be really interesting to hear from somebody who was there through it to talk to them.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think without being political or anything, I mean, the comparisons in terms of some of the things, when you hear nowadays people using the term fascist, you hear people using the term Nazi, I think it's important. I think that what those comparisons are, right? Sure. They're not just labels, that if you read the article or the in-depth analysis, they typically are around these economic policies, these sort of social awareness issues, and they're not necessarily just a stamp, right? You have to kind of be aware of what they're talking about as the comparisons are made.
So I think, correct me if I'm wrong here, but maybe the next episode we're going to deep dive more into the Depression.
I think we do economics.
Go into World War II.
I mean, I think we've got like progressives. We've got
there's so many
Gilded Age. I mean, all that.
And we're leaving things out. And by the way, on that note, every once in a while we'll get a comment about, hey, you guys should talk about this. And I've tried to respond to a couple of them, but we've got some really interesting ones. And we will go backwards because a lot of people are asking for some questions from longer ago. And we'll go back at some point, but right now we're just trying to lay down sort of that first obvious chronology, and then we'll go back and
maybe we end with World War II, and then go back.
Go back to that.
Are we getting a comment that people just want us to go back to something specific?
Yeah, there's some stuff. Yeah, I'll have to look. I'll have to look at a few. I can't. I actually
keep sending your comments.
Please do. Please do. Let us.
Please like, subscribe, all those things.
Follow,
we
please.
Need your help.
Absolutely. Well,
class dismissed.
Ding.